Now, I didn't really finish with my last rant because it devolved into some sort of entertaining madness. I went off track for about 25 minutes about some plot point in regards to the Arondir portion of the story that just didn't make any sense to me. And I had fun with talking about it, basically. So I'm going to try to reel it back a little bit and be a little bit more serious in regards to my breakdown on this series. Now, I'm not a Tolkien scholar. I am just a lifelong Tolkien fan. What does that mean? It means that while I might not know the name of Elendil's grandfather, I am actually interested in looking up what that name is to be accurate about what I want to talk about. I may not memorize every single lineage line and king of the dwarf lords of Durin's folk, but I'm interested in figuring it out. It's in the appendices back here. I may not know the elvish language of Sindarin like the back of my hand, but I'm happy to look it up. So, while I am not a Tolkien scholar, I am a Tolkien fan. A lifelong Tolkien fan. You see, in 1999 to 2000, I watched Fellowship of the Ring, and I was blown away, really. I was blown away by what I had seen on the screen. I had never read the books before. We had a copy of The Hobbit that I was interested in reading until the mid to late 2000s, but after I read it again and again and again. But it was the movies that grasped me. It was the movies that drew me in. It was particularly Fellowship of the Ring. The way that story was set, the way everything was shot, the camera angles. I actually thought that the hobbits were that short. I actually thought that, frick, what's their names? I know one of them, Elijah Wood. He plays Frodo. I thought that all of these guys were that short when I first watched that movie, and then when I saw actual interviews later on with them and how they were actually normal-sized folk, I was blown away. The way that Jackson shot the hobbits compared to, like, Gandalf and Aragorn and all that stuff, he was able to keep those in the same shots, but he was able to make it look like the hobbits were actually half the size of normal-sized folk. And it's like, they didn't even try to do that with the dwarves. You know, the dwarves are shorter than everybody except for the hobbits. The dwarves are a little bit taller than the hobbits, but they would still, like, the head of a dwarf would probably meet the chest, if not lower, like, of an elf, you know. They're not tall, you know. The hobbit would probably meet the chest of a dwarf. The hobbit would probably meet the knee, the mid-length of a human. They're short, and Jackson tried to capture that size. Now, he only had about one or two dwarves in his three movies. Gimli, he's the main dwarf in all three films. And then they had Gloin, his father, in The Fellowship, particularly in a single shot, in a single frame. I don't think he has any lines of dialogue, but they showed Gloin, you know, and the dwarf lords in the prologue portion, you know, but they looked like dwarves. They felt like dwarves. Their height actually felt like it made sense. And while Gimli was built up for comic relief, he felt like a dwarf. He looked like a dwarf. The hobbits looked like hobbits. And then when I looked at things like the Rings of Power and the Harfoots, they don't look like hobbits. The dwarves don't look like dwarves. You know, when I saw a bunch of shots with Elrond visiting the dwarves, and Elrond Durin, that is a very heartfelt thing, even though I'm kind of confused. I'm still confused on why they thought to have Durin the fourth around at the same time as Durin the third. I had a fantastic joke set up for that. How, when Durin the fourth was born, all of the dwarves gathered around, and they looked at the young pup, and they said, "It's Durin the Deathless, reborn! "All hail Durin the Fourth!" And Durin the Third is standing right there going like, "But I'm still alive!" And everyone says, "All hail Durin the Fourth! For he has reincarnated!" And Durin the Third is just standing there bewildered, wondering how he could be reincarnated when he's standing right. And it's just, making that joke is very funny. I made it weeks ago, and me and my friend shared a laugh about it. But then we felt sad when we realized just how bad they messed that up. And it's just like, here we have some orcs here. They actually look pretty evil. They don't even have mouths in the way you would think they have mouths, at least in this drawing. They have pointed ears, you know, they have brownish dusk skin. Aragorn actually looks radiant, you know, he has a little glow about him, which makes sense. I want to talk about that. You know how Aragorn's line is related to Elrond's line. The line of kings of Numenor are Elrond's kin, because Elros was the first king of Numenor. But did you know, I looked this up a week or two ago, and I found out that Elrond is descended from Thingol, as is Elros, as is Aragorn. They're descended from King Thingol, the ruler of Doriath, in the First Age in Beleriand. But did you know that King Thingol's wife was a Maiar? And yes, she gave birth to Thingol's children, which means that King Thingol's descendants have Maiar blood in them. Elrond has Maiar blood. Aragorn has Maiar blood, man. It might be incredibly diminished, but it's there. That's incredible to think about, and it's no wonder the line of kings were like radiant. They like stood tall, and they had a power about them without even needing to speak, without even needing to move. They radiated a certain level of might and dignity that the rest of the men, even the rest of the men of Numenor, they didn't possess that type of radiance that the line of kings had. And it is probably because of both the elven blood and the Maiar blood that flowed through their veins. And that's pretty incredible to think about. And then when you look at the TV show and you see how Elendil and Isildur both are descended of Elros, and both should have that radiance about them, that sort of might about them, and you see how pathetic they are, how, especially Isildur, how pathetic he is. And maybe you're saying he's going through a character arc, but I would argue that he doesn't even need to go through a character arc, because the man was born brilliant. Elendil shone with such radiance. His father was the last king of Dunye, which is the western region. I think I still have my little notepads here. I wonder if I've got Numenor drawn on one of them. Let's see. I'm not going to spend too much time looking for it, but if I've got it, then I'll show you it. And apparently I don't have it, so let's draw it. I'm just going to draw a 5-pointed island. The star. It's going to look terrible. It's going to look absolutely terrible, but forgive me for having terrible handwriting. I'm left-handed. Okay, so in Dunye, or whatever, the fledgling kingdom is over here. It's this portion right here, right? And this is where the faithful were. And, I read through some of the lore in regards to how the faithful landed in Numenor. It was, I believe, Elendil's father. I can't remember his name right now, but Elendil's father sensed that there was something wrong with Pharazôn. Pharazôn was going to sail west into the Valar land, and Elendil's father was going to sail there first, before Elendil. Kind of like how Erendil sailed west to plead for the Valar for aid during the War of Wrath, you know? That's what Elendil's father went to do. He went to sail west to warn the Valar that Pharazôn and his might and his fleet were coming, right? So he tells his son to get 9 ships. He tells Elendil to get 9 ships, load them with everything that of value and all of the people of the faithful. 9 ships sail east for Middle-earth. There was a storm that messed things up, and Isildur and his brother headed into Gondor region, and Elendil and his portion of the fleet headed into the Arnor region. That's why there's two kingdoms in exile, because two groups of ships headed into two different portions. So if I could draw that, because, you know, I always love my visual aids. So we're gonna do another 5-pointed star again. This looks like a 5-pointed clover, right? So here we go with Duniac, right? Now Pharazôn is getting ready to sail his might that way and that way. Now Elendil's father takes his ship and he starts to sail this way to make it look like he's heading east. Then he turns around, sails across, and heads out that way to the west into the Valar to warn the Valar. He's never heard from again. We don't know what happened to him. Maybe he made it to the Valar. Maybe he was rewarded and was allowed to stay in Valinor for his faith. Who knows? We don't know what happened to him. But Elendil and his sons take 9 ships. 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And they all head for Middle-earth. So I'm just going to draw the coastlines, right? So here we're gonna say up here is the north part, and here is like the Gondor part with the region, the mountains or whatever, right? So there's a storm that happens, and half the ships sail this way, half the ships land in Lindon. Elendil's crew landed in Lindon. They meet Gil-galad, and they head on east to form the Kingdom of Arnor. Isildur and his brother form the Kingdom of Gondor, right next door to Mordor, right? And Sauron's growing his powers and all that stuff over there. But this made me think, after watching episode 6, there were only 3 Numenorean ships, and the army was that big with all those horses and all that stuff. So it makes you think, because we have the 2 kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor, and they only came from 9 ships. So these ships must have actually been like these huge, grand, mighty structures. Because, you know, this was the mightiest of mighty of Numenor, right? So I'm thinking that they might have been on the right track now that I think about it. When I looked at the 9 Numenorean ships, maybe the ships were huge, but the show didn't actually show huge ships. From what I looked at from looking on that show, they looked like each ship could maybe hold a crew of about 20 people and maybe 1 or 2 horses with supplies for about a couple of months. That's about as big as those ships were. They're not huge. They would not hold a crew of 100 people plus 100 horses, you know. Numenor didn't really have cavalry. They did have horses on Numenor, but the reason why they didn't have cavalry was because all of their battles were fought overseas. They weren't really fighting battles internally until, like, Pharazôn's era, but, like, they didn't really fight too many battles here. Most of their battles were fought in the east. You know, they sail east. So let me try to draw another one here, another Numenor again. This video is going to only be 20 minutes long, so whatever I stop at, I'll just continue on, just keep continuing to ramble. These are ramble series. This is the ramble series. So I'm teaching myself as I talk and ramble about it here. So they would all, so Pharazôn's crew and his forefathers and the king's men and all that stuff, they would all head over here. Pharazôn would, I don't know if it's Pharazôn or some bloke a century or 2 before, but Umbar is colonized around this time period. They would colonize Umbar here, right? And they would fight a couple battles against the Haradrim. Most of their battles, all of their battles, are fought overseas, you know. During the War of the Elves and Sauron, Tar-Ministir, the nephew of Tar-Telperion, Queen of Numenor, canon Queen of Numenor. You could have used her, but whatever. So Tar-Telperion's nephew, Tar-Ministir, sails to Lindon with a massive fleet. And they fight and rout Sauron's armies in, like, multiple locations, right? They come in, and they keep on routing Sauron's armies, and they push him out of Eriador. And they save the West from Sauron, you know? And then Pharazôn, he conquers Umbar, or maybe Pharazôn's ancestor, or whatever. And around this time period after the War of the Elves and Sauron, Umbar is colonized. They might colonize some other places, you know. They colonize and they make civilizations and whatnot. And I'm thinking it's mostly in the south here. I'm thinking they mostly have a lot of colonies in the south, because if they have anything in the north, I would have to do some extra looking for it. But most of these guys are Kingsman faction. You know, that's why these guys turn into the Black Numenoreans. By the time of the War of the Ring, the people of Umbar are basically like the descendants of the Kingsman faction and the Haradrim. So they're basically like, the Kingsman faction turned into the Black Numenoreans. Their lifespans after a couple centuries turned into normal lifespans, you know, because the light of the Valar and all that stuff left them for what they did. So there were plenty of Kingsman faction left when Numenor sunk, you know. Numenor sinks, Elendil and his sons, they found Arnor up here and Gondor here. But there's still plenty of Black Numenoreans down here, the Kingsman factions who had colonized Umbar and the other port cities. They're still there, you know. Our Farazan didn't just say, hey, I want everybody here to vacate. No, he wanted to keep this up. He wanted to keep this here, right? But he still sailed his army westwards into the Valar, and they were the ones who got blown up. And the rest of the people on Numenor, they got blown up. But everybody else, Elendil and his 9 ships, they made it to Middle-earth, and the Black Numenoreans who were already here, the Kingsmen who were already here, they survived as well. So they became the Corsairs eventually, you know, over a long period of time. But all of their battles were fought overseas. That's why they couldn't breed a bunch of horses here, just take them, because, you know, they're a naval faction. They have to keep the room for the armies and all that stuff. But I'm theorizing, you know, I rambled on for about 5 or 10 minutes, but I was onto something with the 9 ships. I'm thinking that maybe their ships were massive. The show showed us maybe like a ship that could fit 20 people. 20 people and maybe 1 to 2 horses. Let's draw horses and P-E-O-P-L-E. So we have ships that could fit maybe 20 people, maybe 40 people, and a couple horses and some supplies for about a couple months. And then I'm thinking the actual Numenorean ships in Tolkien's lore were these huge, massive craft that can fit hundreds of people. They could fit hundreds of people, right? Not hundreds of horses, but they could fit hundreds of people, a bunch of supplies, many decks, like 4 or 5 decks. These things might have had a bunch of cannons, you know, they could have had cannons, maybe they not have cannons, probably not cannons, they're not pirates, you know, but they have a lot of stuff here. They have a bunch of spears, we'll probably put a bunch of spears, weapons rack, you know, they have a weapons deck, maybe, where they have all their weapons and armor, because they would come out regaled in armor and stuff like that. Maybe they had a bunch of smitheries here, maybe they had cavalries and horse stables in these port cities where they would go to get their horses to form cavalries in Middle-earth, but they didn't have them on Numenor. That's something that bothered me. But now that I made this little theory here, how that maybe with the whole 3 Numenorean ships and then the 9 Numenorean ships canon that Elendil took after Numenor fell, right? I'm thinking if they made these ships, these hypothetical ships that I'm theorizing about, if they made it these ships instead of these tiny little ships, then I don't think people would have questioned that these things could fit 100 people and 100 horses in their armor, right? I wouldn't think that people would question that. If you want Numenor to have horses, if you want Numenor to have a cavalry, it's against the lore, but if you want to force it in, I'm not going to say no, but maybe use these types of ships, these huge, massive structures. I have been disappointed with Numenor from the start. I was disappointed in Elendil. I thought the actor playing him was fine, but the camera angle, again, he's Elendil the Tall. I talked about how Jackson had a camera angle where, even though, let's just draw this tiny little stick figure. Let's say this is Elijah Wood, and let's say this is Viggo Mortensen, right? Let's say, in actuality, they're roughly around the same size. But the way Peter Jackson shot his camera and all that stuff, he made it so that Frodo looked like that, and Aragorn looked like that. right? They're the same people, but he shot it to look like that. So if you wanted to have Elendil the Tall, right? If you wanted to have Elendil the Tall, you could still do that. Even though the guy who plays Elendil might be about this tall compared to, say, the other normal Numenoreans, or Galadriel, or Halbrand, and all that stuff. You could have shot the camera angle much like how Jackson did it, and make it how Elendil could look like he's towering over all the other normal people, all the normal Numenoreans and the men and all this stuff. That's one way you could have shot him. You could have shot him to be this mythical figure that he is in the lore, this mythical mighty hero, this ray of light that shone brighter than his ancestors for quite a while. This was like one of the greater men of Numenor, right? This guy was supposed to be like one of the last bright lights of Numenor. In fact, Numenor's last light, because he left Numenor, and then Numenor was no more. So he really was the last light of Numenor, right? And you kind of do him dirty. You make him just a normal dude. You make him kind of subservient to the other people around him, even though he would probably be Muriel's peer, not her servant. He would be her peer. Because Elendil's father was a friend of Pharazôn, you know? Elendil's family would probably have grown up with Pharazôn and his family, and Muriel and her family. They're all kin. They're all related. You know, these kings did not just have one single child. They had multiple childs. And they would all grow off to have their own lands. You know, when I'm drawing this 5-pointed Numenor or whatever, right? We have this one being for Elendil's family. Well, there's 5 other points, and each one has a name that I could probably look up, but I don't feel like it because I'm running out of time. I'm going to stop at 25 minutes. But each one of these is probably ruled by a descendant or a cousin or something like that. You know, there's a bunch of royals in this family aside from the direct line. You know, there's the direct line, and then there's all the other siblings. And, you know, they don't just F off into the sunset. They would probably be given their own lands to rule, and they're probably given each of these branches of Numenor, and then the middle one, the mountain here, and then the capital or whatever. It's like they don't really show that. They don't show Numenor being this grand place that's lived in, you know? Numenor just kind of looks like a basic city. It kind of looks like a basic Minas Tirith, even though Numenor is supposed to be the greatest civilization that mankind had ever achieved. Nothing ever since Numenor would ever look this good. Gondor would never look this good. Arnor would never look this good. The big metropolis city of Fornost would not look this good. Fornost would look like a tiny little hovel compared to even the smallest of cities in Numenor. Numenor was the greatest and mightiest of the civilizations. It was Tolkien's Atlantis. Like, he actually called it Atlantis for a while. He was making his own Atlantis story with the time travel and stuff he was playing with C.S. Lewis about, and then he evolved it over many revisions and revisions and revisions, and then we got Numenor. This was his Atlantis, the greatest society that his humans had ever achieved, and the Rings of Power doesn't show us that. They're just normal people. All of the civilians that we see in Numenor, they're just normal-looking people. They're just regular, average Joes that you probably find in modern day. They're probably a little even dirtier. Nobody in Numenor should be dirty. Nobody in Numenor should be dirty. But, so we did a little bit more. We talked about the ships. We talked about Numenor. We talked about the history of, like, the 9 ships and how this ship, the theoretical ships that I could thought up might be better than the 3. Even though you could have 3 of these huge ones and fit the army that showed up in episode 6, and it wouldn't have been as what-able. So we talked about that. Maybe next time I'll talk about some of the characters and how they could have done it a little bit better. But I'm gonna try not to be as rage mode about this as I was in the previous episode. I may get rage mode again when episode 7 comes out. You'll never know. But until then, if I make another episode before then, I'm just gonna talk about some other minor things. These are gonna be shorter videos. I'm trying not to get 50 minutes again, but thank you for watching this series. I know that you might be sick of this. You might be sick of hearing me talk about Lord of the Rings every single time. This is the 4th time I'm talking about it. I might even go up to 10 times. But I just want, I love the opportunity to nerd out over this series, to talk about this fandom. I might be going in 26 minutes, that's fine, I don't care anymore. But it's like Tolkien, Middle-earth, this was my first major foray into fantasy, into high fantasy. Tolkien was my inspiration to get into writing. Tolkien was my inspiration to get into world building. Tolkien was... This is a series that is very important to me, and I didn't really follow too much of the marketing for the Rings of Power because I was kind of running out of hope for Hollywood, for studios and their versions of these TV shows and these movies, because a lot of them were disappointing. We get a lot of disappointing lore retcons. We get a lot of disappointing problems throughout the series, throughout all these shows. Star Trek, we had problems with Star Trek that I'm not going to get into, but you know, Spock singing, that's your clue. There's problems with Star Trek. There's revisionist history and Doctor Who with a lot of people are upset about that in regards to William Hartnell no longer being the first Doctor, and that hurt a lot of people, and people feel like that's an insult to William Hartnell and in how he started that series. There's a lot of things throughout all of these fandoms that are really crushing my hope for things that I grew up with, and now they're doing it to Tolkien, and it hurts. So at least I want to make a series of videos to just nerd out about it while maybe rambling and raging about it at the same time. I don't know. I don't care. I just love to talk about this world a little bit with you guys, if that's okay with you. Thanks for watching.